Some time for this. You know, there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. Oh, man. All right. Let me sit up in straight base. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Just kidding.
We started
But a
at,
big
well, we got
dose of
2
my
minutes left.
cousins, and that was good. I can 250. Good feel. Oh, so yeah.
So we're ready. It's 3 o'clock, right on the nose, according to my. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to call the October 7th meeting of the Budget Committee to order. Hope everyone had a good summer, and we're all here. So this is good, and it looks like summer outside today. So this is perfect. And I think the first thing we do is the minutes from May 22nd. Everybody's had a chance to read them, I assume. Are there any changes or corrections?
I'll move approval.
Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All those in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
All right. We've done it. Thank you, everyone. So your show, or is it Mr. Mokerheist's or?
If we looked at it.
Okay, all right.
I think Eliza.
Eliza?
I'll immediately turn it over to Penny, who is a member of the elected officials compensation board.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Penny Doherty. I am a member of the Lane County Elected Officials Compensation Board. I'm also the retired director of the University of Oregon Office of Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity. Early and retirement. With me is Eliza Fishinsky, Lane County Senior Classification and Compensation Analyst, who I understand would like to add to her title. She provides staff support to our compensation board. She's absolutely beyond compare. And Alana Holmes is here, our Lane County Human Resources Officer. The Elected Officials Compensation Board, and that is kind of a mouthful. So if you don't mind, I'll just call it the EOCB, is a 5-member citizen board charged under state law with reviewing elected officials' compensation on a yearly basis and providing recommendations to the budget committee and board. As you all know, Lane County elected officials include the Lane Commissioners, the Assessor, the District Attorney, the Justice of the Peace, and the Sheriff. Consistent with the Lane County Manual and with the EOCB bylaws in reviewing elected officials' compensation, the EOCB considers compensation paid to persons comparably employed throughout Oregon, the number of employees supervised by that officer, the size of the budget that's administered, the duties and responsibilities of the elected officer, and compensation paid to the officer's subordinates. The EOCB uses methods consistent with HR's approach to compensation for Lane County employees. The focus for the EOCB review, I would say, among our group, is to recommend compensation that is competitive, allowing Lane County to attract and retain very highly qualified individuals to fill these important elected positions. So that becomes kind of really the focus of our work. We make recommendations to you, the Budget Committee, who then make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners for final approval. I thought I'd start with compensation following the 2023 review. Following that 2023 EOCB review, compensation adjustments were approved for all elected officials. The Assessor, District Attorney, Justice of the Peace, and Sheriff all received compensation adjustments effective in July of 2023. Consistent with the Lane County Charter, the Board of Commissioners are scheduled to receive in January of 2025 the market adjustment that was approved last year. So then turning to our review this year, the 2024 EOCB review, we met 2 times in May and June. We reviewed total compensation of Lane County elected officials in comparison to comparably employed persons in the 5 county comparators used by the county: Clackamas, Deschutes, Jackson, Marion, and Washington. The same used by HR in evaluating employee compensation. For purposes of our review, we looked at total compensation. That includes not just base salary, but also the value of benefits such as health insurance and retirement contributions and stipends. For Lane County employees, the county typically targets compensation to be within plus or minus 5% of the comparator average. Again, we are doing our work in a way that's consistent with HR. We found that the Sheriff, the Justice of the Peace, the District Attorney, and the Assessor are all within 5% of the average of the comparator's compensation. For the commissioners, EOCB considered the compensation that commissioners will be earning after the adjustment scheduled for January 2025 in its comparator analysis. The commissioners' January 2025 compensation is 10% below the comparator average, putting their compensation on the brink of being what the county would consider misaligned. We also reviewed compensation for compression against direct reports. And compression is when the salary range for a direct report is very close to or more than that of their supervisor. The sheriff is experiencing compression with his highest paid direct report, and after that direct report receives their next step increase, the sheriff will be making less than the direct report. So we do have compression there, and under Oregon law, the sheriff must make more than their highest paid direct report. So we have an issue to be addressed there. So based on that comparator analysis and compression analysis, EOCB makes the following recommendations based on their review. the EOCB recommends that all elected officials receive a roughly 2% cost of living adjustment. A regular cost of living adjustment helps ensure that elected officials don't fall behind in comparison to the comparator average. And a 2% COLA is consistent with the COLA provided to the bargaining units that had contracts in place at the time that we made our recommendation. So that's the first component of our recommendation, a 2% COLA for all. The EOCB recommends a roughly 3% market adjustment for the commissioners, in addition to the previously approved adjustment. Along with the recommended COLA, this will bring the commissioners' compensation within 5% of the comparator average. And our thinking is that smaller, more regular adjustments to align with the market will help ensure that we're not in the place of having to make really large adjustments. That's a second component of our recommendation. The third component is that the EOCB recommends a roughly 6.62% compression adjustment for the sheriff. This will ensure that his compensation remains above that of his highest paid direct report, even after scheduled adjustments to the direct report's compensation. So those are the recommendations that we are bringing to you. The effective date for those, EOCB recommends that the changes for the assessor, district attorney, justice of the peace, and sheriff be retroactive to the first day of the first pay period after July 1, 2024. Lane Charter limits the effective date for compensation adjustments for commissioners. Those have to occur after a general election. Therefore, the changes recommended for the commissioners cannot, under the charter, be effective until the first day of the first pay period after January 1, 2025. That's really the recommendations that we're bringing to you based on our review of all of the data that Eliza was able to gather for us. The Budget Committee has the option to recommend to the Board of Commissioners all, some, or none of these adjustments, or to recommend adjustments of a different amount. But it is important to keep in mind that without an adjustment for the sheriff, it would put Lane County in violation of the statute regarding sheriff compensation when his direct report has his next scheduled increase. So I ask you to keep that in mind as you consider whether to accept or not accept or modify the recommendations that the EOCB is bringing to you. Now, there's a lot more detail about these recommendations in the packet of material that was sent out to you. I've tried to keep it just at the high level, the important pieces, but there's a lot more detail in that packet in terms of the underlying numbers. But I didn't figure you needed for me to try to make my way through that. That would be quite a mouthful for me. So that's what I had to present to you. And if you have questions for me, I will do my best to answer them. And I'm certain with Eliza's help that there's none that we won't be able to answer, but that's it for my presentation.
Thank you, Penny. That was great. No, I read this I like graphs, so I mean or charts, so I like those being a retired banker, so that was good. I like that. Do we have questions for Penny? Commissioner Parr?
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification regarding the sheriff's compression adjustment. That is statutory, is that what I understand?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Other questions, comments?
That there is a Oregon state law that says the sheriff has to make more than his direct report. Right now, we could not make an adjustment. He is making more than his direct report. But if we give his direct report an increase, which is scheduled to happen because his direct report will get a step increase on his anniversary. At that juncture, we would have to adjust this sheriff's salary to be like 1 cent above the direct report if we don't make this adjustment now.
And does that happen the 1st of January? Is that what I read in here? I believe.
On the anniversary. It happens either when the direct report receives a COLA or something like that, none of which are scheduled right now. Their step increase would happen in April.
April. Okay, no, I knew I read something in here. Right. Okay, thank you.
And a further clarification, your recommendation for the sheriff is that if we make the adjustment that it's retroactive, the first pay period after July 1,
Mhm.
2024. It'll be retroactive for, okay, thank you.
Other questions? Comments?
Looking for a motion.
There's nothing else to discuss. If there's no more comments or questions for the,
Seems reasonable. It all seems reasonable. Compression's important to stay away from, and you guys need to get paid equivalent amounts of everybody else, so I have no problems with the recommendations. It's really within reason.
Would these be brought up in separate motions or all in one?
I think we can do it all in one, can we not? I think we did last year, I believe.
I'd prefer to recommend separating two
Okay.
out of that. I'd say use the county commissioners as one
Okay.
item and the rest of them as another. I would be okay with that.
I think I'm fine with that. I think everybody else would be fine with that. So are you going to make a motion? Oh, excuse me.
I'm just gonna say with the current budget the county's facing, I would like to address my thoughts are to address the compression and maybe ask all electeds to hold off this go. Just to show that this truly is hard times. We talk about it in the PSCC all the time. We're not trimming fat, we're not trimming muscle, we're down to the bone. These are up against some dire budget woes.
Mr. Bud?
I'll add, that I'm good with separating out the commissioners. I think our other electeds should get the recommendations here and move those forward. But I am okay with holding off with the commissioners' adjustments since we have an adjustment coming in January.
Does that, though, that doesn't address keeping elected official salaries within that 5% range, we'd still be closer to that 10%. That is
That
the
would be fair.
concern. I would have.
Because compression always comes and bites you 5 years down the road.
Mhm.
When you may not have even less, you may have even less money. And suddenly you have to jump somebody by, 5 or 10 or 15% because you haven't kept up. Particularly if you have to replace somebody, nobody's, that's the problem with raising salaries. Nobody wants to do it to a certain extent, commissioners, board members, it's like, oh, we're okay. But if you don't do it, then it just gets weird later down the road and creates way more problems.
And basically, that's what happened last year. I think because we hadn't done it since like 2016, I believe. And then it got, I appreciate that commissioners are willing to do that for sure. And I agree. I think that's good.
Yeah, separating is fine.
But it does put us in a year or two down the road or further, we'll be
Yeah.
in worse shape. And sometimes it may be better to do a small percentage increase
Keeping it
on a
regular.
regular basis than the others. So.
Just along that line, your recommendation, Penny, is to keep it with smaller increment and more regular updates, to keep it from getting to a point where people have a sticker shock on what the item, sometime in the future.
That was exactly our thinking, yes.
I think listening to Greg Nelson, Greg, you've done salaries for Colt Gill, for instance.
Yeah.
So,
And that one was hard because he kept saying, I don't want to raise, I don't want to raise. And
I was on your
he
budget
said,
committee.
You have to pay today, buddy, sorry. I mean, because it was getting to the point where if we had to replace him, which a few years later we did, we would have been way behind the curve on the salary. And so we kind of had to force him to take the money. So I don't want to have to force you guys to take the money 2 or 3 years down the road, because that's weird. I figure if somebody asks me if I want money, they say, here, I'll give you $10 for that. I go, no, if they ask the second time, you take it. You know, it's like, I'm not gonna argue about this,
Right.
you know, so, you know, in a way that holds here too, it's like, take it now, say yes.
If I could real quick, so obviously the recommendations include retroactive pay back to the beginning of the fiscal year, which we've already done a budget for. So how would that impact the approved budget?
So if we needed to adjust total appropriations for like the Board of Commissioners as a specific department ID that we track salaries and other expenses. So if we were in danger of having a budget violation, we would increase the appropriations. So I say that because sometimes the salary increases that are approved mid-year, we actually go change the budget, and sometimes we wait to see. Because really, we want our budget to reflect what we're really going to spend as a grand total, not just salaries by themselves. So really kind of look at everything together.
Right.
So may or may not be an adjustment.
I do understand the recommendation and the retroactive part, but we do go through an extensive budget process in May and recommend a budget to the Board of Commissioners. And these numbers weren't in there, and we made a lot of hard choices at that point in time. You know, I think a lot of us look at the services the county provides, and we're trying to make sure that they're getting funds into the appropriate places at the appropriate times, and we spend a lot of time on that. I understand the recommendation for retroactive portion of it, but it does kind of conflict with my budget duties to some extent, that it wasn't brought up as a potential item or so forth for the budget that we reviewed and approved. So when, you know, we were looking, I felt bad for the sheriff's department and the lack of patrol and a bunch of other stuff at that point in time. And now we're actually talking about, hey, let's not even worry about that now. Let's just take salary stuff into consideration. The salary is important. I don't want to see future compression either. So I don't have any solutions, just comments.
Thank you, Herb. Other comments? So what is the committee's pleasure? Mr. Moore?
I will start with a motion. I move to recommend a 3% adjustment for the excuse me, a 6.67% adjustment for the sheriff. 6.2 compression adjustment for the sheriff, retroactive to July 21st, 2024.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Just a question, you didn't recommend the COLA,
Right.
was that on purpose?
That was on
Okay.
purpose, yeah.
Aren't we treating them, the elected officials, not commission, as a group?
Other than this is a compression, a specific for a single elected official.
The recommendation was that we do both. Do we want to separate each compensation?
That was my direction, and
Okay.
if my second backs out, or if it goes down, then we can go to a different motion. But that, my suggestion is that we do it in 3 different motions. I'm starting out by making it 3 separate motions as opposed to a single.
Is that acceptable?
Second.
Okay, so we have a first and second. Any further discussion for the sheriff? Can we repeat that? It's a 6.62 plus the
Yes.
3% COLA. Is that what we talked about?
No, not, no, I've misspoke on the 3% adjustment. That was a different thing.
Okay.
It's just the third line, which
The
is the
6.62% is what-
6.62,
that's what-
retroactive to July 21st.
Okay.
The first pay period subsequent to July 21st.
So that the actual adjustment that will be in a board order that comes out of this, if you all approve it, would be in the phrase of an actual dollar amount as opposed to a percentage.
Okay.
Because if
Thank
we do percentages, we end up with like fractions of a penny, and
Yeah.
that's.
Doesn't work.
Okay, so we're all clear on what the motion is, correct? Right? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Aye.
Excuse me.
She said
Slight
aye.
delay on.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Two on screen.
Thank you, Commissioner Trigger.
Sarah there.
And committee member Sarah Means is online and also voted.
Apologies, I'm traveling, so I need to stay offline or off camera.
Okay, so we have, like that. What is further pleasure for other motions? Commissioner Parr?
I move a 2% COLA adjustment for all elected officials. And help me with this one a little bit, Penny. Is it for the commissioners, is that January 1st and the others are retroactive to July 1st, or is this all?
It would be retroactive to July, the first pay period following July 1st, 2024 for everyone but the commissioners. The first pay period following July 1, 2025 for the commissioners.
Which is after the November general election.
Presuming we can, if this passes, then we can get it on your calendar for the board before.
That's my motion.
Is it July or January for the commissioners?
It would be January for the commissioners.
Yeah, January.
A clarification, yeah, sorry. The recommended COLAs are slightly different than just a flat 2% as listed in attachment 1. The assessors 1.96, the commissioner and the DA is 1.97. The justice of the peace is 1.96 and the sheriff is 1.95.
Yes, gets into the rounding issue.
Right.
Our system enters dollar amounts as hourly rates. And when you multiply that out, it ends up being not exactly a 2% COLA. And so those detailed numbers, it's approximately 2%, but we're looking at the dollar amount that we need to have to get there, as opposed to adding 2% in any of the fractions of a sentence.
Right. So, I mean, the adjustment could be the recommended COLA in the attachment 1.
Yes. So I'll revise that to say a term that we use in building materials. A 2x4 is 1.5 by 3.5. That's nominal. So a nominal 2% adjustment based upon the schedule outlined in the paperwork.
I'll just add that I would agree for that for the other elected officials. But for me, because we already have an adjustment for commissioners coming in January, I'm not going to support the one for the commissioners. So for the motion for all of them, that's the only reason I would say that.
And I intentionally laid it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have the motion on the table. Do we have a second?
Second. Okay.
Any further discussion for the Commissioner Farr's motion?
Can
Those
you
in
just
favor?
please,
Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Dickens, sorry.
the motion on the table is to award the COLAs as presented with their attendant effective dates, as is in the materials presented for all. Is that the motion that's on the table?
Yes, for all elected officials.
Including the commissioners?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
That's it.
I think you're going to have to count again.
Yeah,
we have to do that again.
people were saying aye when they were saying no, and
So raise your hands also, please, and all those in favor? Opposed?
who's abstaining?
You're split.
Clarify if
Four to
Sarah
four.
was Sarah,
It looked like Sarah raised her
Sarah
hand.
Okay.
We needed to clarify what the online votes were, because that.
Yes, Commissioner Trigger and Sarah I'm sorry, we didn't catch yours.
Sarah was an aye.
Okay, so that's 5.
And I voted nay on this motion.
So that's 5-5 is what I got.
Motion fails.
Motion fails, yes. Okay.
I'll modify the motion,
Please, Commissioner.
which is the same motion excluding the commissioners. Basically adopting the recommended COLA per attachment A for all electeds other than the commissioners.
I'll
I'll
second.
second. No. There we go.
She got it first.
Okay, been moved and seconded for a 2% COLA for all elected officials excluding the commissioners. All those in favor? Aye.
I,
Opposed? Okay. 8 yeses, 2 nos. Do we get those? Okay. The motion carries.
And subsequent to the meeting, I'll explain why I did that way. There was a reason.
All right, we have, what else is our pleasure to do forward on
Well, we
motions?
could try to pay the commissioners. They don't sound like they want money though.
Are you offering a motion or not?
Not really. I'm
Okay.
just, it seems, you know, from the last vote that COLA's out the window.
Yeah.
And that means, you know, I don't know. It's always hard to pay the people who hold the purse strings.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think you're gonna find people that are gonna whine about the pay. They're still gonna run and be elected in that position. So I think you still have a bet to hedge on that
Oh,
one.
yeah.
How much will you pay to the Bethel? On this?
Zero.
Mhm.
Free food occasion.
So is there other things else that we need to look at? Have we reached everything except for the commissioners? Is that correct? And we're not going to get a motion for that. It doesn't appear. I'm not getting any takers.
This is a case where the board and the budget committee do not take the recommendation of the committee that studied it and made the recommendation. That happens.
If I, in the light of that, I would like to thank the
Oh,
members
Yeah.
of the elected officials compensation board for all the work and all the research and bringing the information forward in such a concise portion. So don't take the end result as any type of reflection on that process and so forth. Very important process and very well presented. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I will certainly second that. It was, and I understand our commissioners are very responsible. So that's great.
And the thanks also goes very much to Eliza, who provides our staff support, who really is the one that digs in and gathers the numbers for us to analyze. So, and it's our pleasure to serve, and understand you have decisions that you need to make, but we will continue to do the job we're charged with doing, which is really looking at compensation and bringing to you what we feel are sound recommendations.
Absolutely. I can go too. Holly.
To Herb's point, if there's a way to build into our next budget cycle to have a placeholder so that we don't get into this position again where we've held $50,000 or $100,000 to sort of to keep it in mind, so that we're accounting for that as we're going through the entire budget process, so that we can keep compression and all of these competitiveness in mind as we have our next budget cycle.
Looking at Christine.
Exactly how did
We've done that before. Yeah, so it really potentially is up to the committee, the EOCB schedule, if we have the data by then. We're meeting in May.
Before May. Before May.
So,
I think that's a great suggestion. I mean, that's we can build it right in that way.
as long as it's been approved. So I will tell you, I mean, there was talk about, hey, it wasn't known when we were building the budget. We don't assume anything that has not been approved by the Board of Commissioners. So we've been bargaining with 3 unions. Those are not in the budget right now, even though they're gonna go back to July 1st. So just because we want to actually budget what's going to happen for sure. So, but as long as we had, final information and a recommendation from the EOCB, the budget committee can make those.
And I think I would agree with that. It's just, we won't know until we get closer if all of our comps have already gone through their cycles to get us the numbers to advance for the, for this next coming fiscal year. So it will be dependent on that, but we certainly hear you and know that that would be the hope that if possible, we bring that forward. And if for some reason we can't bring solid numbers, we'll talk to Christine about what should be presented to you to be able to at least have that conversation during that allotted time.
So just so I have it straight in my head, monies for this ends up coming out of reserves, right?
Yeah.
That's where,
It does, yeah, and then we'll build it in.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Oh, go ahead.
Just as a logistical matter, in past years, the motions that have become to the board on this have been divided up by each position. And for the folks who will have, the commissioners have to vote on this, would you prefer that that be done the same way, even though the motion was by type of compensation, I guess?
I prefer they all be kept separate.
Mhm.
So noted.
Head nods.
So noted.
Chair, you okay with that? Good, thanks.
Okay. Very good.
I'm sorry, Chair, there's a quick question. When will that come to the Board of Commissioners?
We will be talking to the folks who do the scheduling for the board and the agenda setting. I'm hoping to get it coming before the board soon. However, as there isn't a recommendation for commissioner adjustments, that timeline of it has to come before the next election isn't as pressing.
But there's no reason to not bring it right away.
There's no reason to
Especially
not
for the
bring it right
retroactive.
away, but when we're looking at scheduling, creating packets and things like that, that would be the. I would listen to the folks who do the scheduling to know when they have time for me.
And I'll make my point, or my preference in that as soon as possible, so we get this taken care of, so we can get the sheriffs adjusted and make sure that, so the public knows exactly what happened here today.
Right. Anything else? All right, very good. Thank you all. I think we are adjourned.
Sure.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Same for.
Do you really?
Is that class?
Yeah, you can see your review. I couldn't say a story about this. This was at the. It was there. You know, Bruce was. Well, yeah, good for them.
Perfect. Thanks again. We get it up next time.
I was, this was, I'm shooting